Like on his way to St. Joe, we'll be long gone by the time he gets back. I've asked the company to send you some extra riders. Rachel has...
This is a special report from ABC News.
Good evening. This is Carol Simpson in Washington. President Bush is at Bethesda Naval Hospital tonight, where he is reported in stable condition after suffering shortness of breath while jogging at Camp David this afternoon. In just a few moments, presidential spokesman Marlon Fitzwater will be holding a briefing for reporters at the White House. Before that briefing begins, here's what we know so far. After the president experienced shortness of breath, one of his personal physicians determined that he'd suffered an atrial fibrillation, a rapid, uncoordinated contraction of the upper heart chamber. We understand this is not normally a life-threatening situation. Standing by at the White House is ABC's Ann Compton. Ann, what else can you add?
We can add that from two indications it would seem the president's in pretty good shape. One, that people saw him walk from his helicopter into the hospital building. That was after the incident about 3 hours, almost 4 hours ago. And the second instance when the phone at the vice president's residence rang at about 7:20, and Vice President Quayle took a call from the president, who was, we are told, relatively upbeat and even in something of a joking mood. They are not taking, here at the White House, they don't take anything medical about the president without great seriousness and great concern. They don't take anything for granted, but they are also not panicking over this either.
And the president had a physical on March 27th and was pronounced in excellent health. Is this a surprise?
Here's Marlon Fitzwater, Carol.
Okay.
President Bush is relaxed, comfortable, and having dinner with Mrs. Bush in his room at Bethesda Naval Hospital this evening. He is in good spirits, and the doctor's reports are very positive. President Bush developed atrial fibrillation, which is an irregularity of the heartbeat, while running at Camp David this afternoon about 4:20 p.m. This condition presented itself as unusual fatigue during the run. The president was evaluated by Dr. Michael Nash at Camp David, who detected the irregular heartbeat and found him to be entirely stable with no other symptoms. The president, accompanied by Mrs. Bush and Dr. Nash, flew by helicopter to Bethesda Naval Hospital, arriving about 5:58 p.m. this evening. At the time of hospital admission, the irregular heartbeat was still present, but the president was completely alert and entirely stable with no complaints. The president walked into the hospital on his own power. An electrocardiogram showed no abnormalities except the irregular heart rhythm. An ultrasound examination of the heart showed no structural abnormalities and normal heart function. The president is undergoing treatment for atrial fibrillation with the drug digoxin. Diagnostic testing and initial treatment took approximately 1 hour. The president has been consulting with Governor Sununu on various issues at the hospital. The president will remain there for observation over the night. Physicians in attendance are Dr. Lawrence Moore, Colonel of the U.S. Army, Dr. Michael Nash, Major U.S. Air Force of the White House Medical Unit, and Dr. John A. Williams III, Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Navy, a staff cardiologist at Bethesda Naval Hospital. Mrs. Bush will remain with the president at the hospital overnight. Vice President Quayle spoke with the president by telephone about 7:20 p.m. and found him in excellent spirits. I'll try to answer any questions that you have. Frank?
Marlon, how long was he running when this happened? Did he fall, or was there any outward sign?
He had been running for several minutes. I don't have the exact time. He simply complained of fatigue and mentioned to his Secret Service agents that he thought he should check it out. They walked at that point over to the camp infirmary where they met Dr. Nash, and he conducted the initial examination. Tom?
Did he have any other problem like chest pain, dizziness?
He didn't complain of anything other than just fatigue, a little shortness of breath, but that seemed to be the nature of the complaints at the time.
Does the heart rhythm continue even now?
I can't say that it does at this point. The doctors reported that it did at the time of admission, but I don't know whether it does right now. Helen?
Was Heart attack definitely being ruled out, and will he be undergoing more tests? And could his stay in the hospital be prolonged? And is he canceling any this week's?
There are no indications at this time that he had a heart attack. The president will remain overnight for observation. There are some tests that were taken during the examination that we won't have the results of until tomorrow, and so we'll make a report to you on those at that time. Whether or not the president will return to Camp David or the White House tomorrow, or exactly when, is still a question to be settled tomorrow. The President and Mrs. Bush would like to go back to Camp David, but we're not sure what their plans will be. We will let you know that tomorrow. Sean?
No, did the president have any advance warning when feeling ill early today? He looked terrific in Michigan.
There was no advance warning and no prior indications. As you know, the president had a physical examination in March. The doctors prescribed him in excellent health, and there was no indication of this problem at that time. Pat?
Can you tell us what the president had to say to people? Was he alarmed, anxious?
No, the president was in very good spirits. As I said, he walked to the infirmary, was checked out. He was making jokes with the staff about trying to get back to jogging and hadn't finished his game and so forth. He walked to the helicopter and came down to Bethesda Naval in quite good spirits, did some routine paperwork. Before he left, he asked that his briefcase be put on the helicopter so he'd have some work to do. And so he's in good spirits and is ready to get back in the game.
Doctors often say that anxiety is the real problem for people who suffer this ailment. Would you say the president is not anxious?
The president is calm, cool, and collected and never been anxious in his life. Well, maybe once, but I can't remember it. Michael?
Along those lines, though, another factor, a contributing factor can be fatigue. We understand that the president's been under a lot of stress lately. Has that been ruled out as a cause, or might he be asked to take it easy for a while?
They don't expect to prescribe any restraints for his physical activity, assuming that this diagnosis holds up. He could be back jogging in a matter of days. And as I said, the president has conducted himself in extremely rigorous fashion in terms of all of his competitive sports activities, and this problem has not produced any problem before. I would say that he has not canceled any of his plans next week, intends to conduct a full schedule on Monday, and we don't see any change in his physical routine either. Ann?
Was there anybody else jogging with him at the time, or was it just the agents? And also, do you have any idea whether he had gone for 2 minutes or 15 minutes?
It was just Secret Service agents, but I don't know the exact amount of time he was running. Wendell?
Alan, what did the president talk with Vice President Quayle about?
The Vice President just called, obviously, to see how he was getting along, how the tests were coming, his general spirits. It was just a pleasantries conversation.
Who called?
Vice President called the President.
Anybody else? Yeah, Marlene, actually, speaking of Quayle, have any precautionary steps been taken to prepare him to resume?
Well, Governor Sununu called the Vice President and General Scowcroft this afternoon before the President left Camp David, just to tell them. But there were no special precautions that were taken. This was never considered to be that serious. There's never been any question of the president losing consciousness or not being able to carry out his functions. He's been, as I mentioned, walking around, alert, active through all of this. So there's never been any contemplation that I'm aware of having to implement any broader kinds of notification. Helen?
What do they think is the reason that came on him, if you don't say this? No stress and overdoing it in exercise, and what was the reason?
Well, there really isn't any way to tell. This is one of those things where if you look it up in the medical dictionary, as I did backstage, it says that this often happens to people. It's relatively common. It's produced by fatigue, but beyond that, it's pretty hard to say. Yes, ma'am.
Marlon, can you tell us a little bit more about this drug that the president will be taking and exactly what it is meant to do?
It's digoxin. It's spelled D-I-G-O-X-I-N, and it doesn't have any side effects from the standpoint of any physical changes. It's designed to restore the rhythm to restore the heart to a normal rhythm.
Is he already taking this, or will he be taking?
He is taking this medicine. He'll continue to take it for probably several weeks, perhaps a month or so, and at that time they'll reevaluate it and see if it should be continued or what should be done. Ellen?
It's been now something like 4 hours, Marlon, since this incident occurred. Can you tell us whether his heartbeat is now normal? And can you describe for us the tests he has undergone and the tests he is undergoing?
Well, he's taking this medication to ensure its normalcy, but I don't have anything more specific.
Can you tell us the tests he underwent at Camp David, those that he underwent at the hospital, and when we can expect to hear those results?
I don't have a list of specific tests. I'll ask the doctors about that tomorrow. Patrick?
You say that the president will be back jogging within a week. Are you kidding about that? I mean,
That's what the doctor said, is that he could be engaged in physical activity very soon, in a matter of days.
you hear about joggers, supposedly healthy people, falling over of heart attacks every day. I mean, would the president seriously contemplate going back to jogging?
I was simply trying to point out that this is not the kind of thing that limits physical activity for any period of time.
Marlon,
And
you've treated this all very coolly and calmly with no sense of panic, but whenever there's a question about the president's health, especially one where he says he needs some kind of, there is a certain amount of concern. Are you saying that there is not a great deal of concern about the president's, either this episode or his health in the hours to come?
the medical diagnosis and treatment to this point indicates a routine handling of this. The statement, I think, is very clear on that point, that this is a problem that is treatable with medication. The president's in good spirits, and we don't have any undue alarm.
You didn't scare him or any of you?
The president just called in to say that he was running or walking for about 35 to 40 minutes. Now, this doesn't mean you can all ask questions of the president and he'll call up and give you an answer. Dinner this evening consisted of steak, salad, mixed vegetables, and skim milk.
Is he watching this on television, Marlon?
Yes, he is.
Are you sure that's wise?
He thinks you've done a great job so far, Pat. Frank.
Marlon, can you say
Let's just take 2 or 3 more questions and we'll wrap it up.
Can you tell us whether, A, there have been any prior episodes where he might have felt overly fatigued but not felt so much so that he needed medical care, and whether there are any underlying major conditions that have to be ruled out that could have caused this?
No indication of past complaints or concerns similar to this situation.
How about the idea that any functional situations could bring on this atrial fibrillation that have to be ruled out? These tests must be looking for something.
No activities, physical or of any other kind, that would have to be ruled out, at least on the basis of the existing test. Jim?
Is he hooked up to any kind of monitors now?
Well, he's being observed. I don't know kind of what that means, frankly. I'll have to ask the doctors.
Right.
Frank, last question.
And, can you say whether, when you say this situation can be treated with medication, does that mean that President Bush will have to be on medication more or less permanently as a result of this? And can you say what will determine whether, in fact, he will be released tomorrow?
We can't say permanently, as I said, on the digoxin. It will be for a period of time, and then they'll have to reevaluate it. But it is something that's treated medically and does not have any side effects or any long-term problems should that be necessary. Many people are on this kind of treatment for long periods. Thank you very much.
When will you hear from you next?
If you joined us in progress, we've been watching a briefing by Marlon Fitzwater, the White House spokesman, about President Bush's condition. Briefly to recap, he said the president right now is relaxed and comfortable and having dinner with Mrs. Bush in his hospital room at Bethesda Naval Hospital. He said all reports are positive. Marlon Fitzwater was asked whether a heart attack had been ruled out, and he said there is no indication that he had a heart attack, but he will be observed overnight and more tests will be done. Marlon Fitzwater said that the president will be taking the drug digoxin, which will restore his heart to a normal rhythm. That was the problem. He suffered shortness of breath and It was attributed to an atrial fibrillation, which would cause rapid pulsating of his heart. We have on the phone with us now from Boston, Dr. Tim Johnson, our medical editor. Tim, anything in that briefing that should give us comfort or give us cause for alarm?
Well, it does sound like a fairly routine case of atrial fibrillation in terms of the way it was described. I'll point out several things. First of all, the president may have had this rhythm problem before he started jogging, and it was brought out only because of the exertion of jogging. Or, indeed, it may have started because of the jogging. It's hard to know. Secondly, he is being treated in low-key fashion with the drug digoxin, by the way, is the way it's pronounced. Doctors often simply refer to it as dig. It's a form of digitalis. And this is a fairly standard and routine way of treating it. If he were in more extreme condition because of the heart rhythm problem, he might well have been treated with electrical treatment, so-called cardioversion, to try to restore the heart to normal rhythm very quickly. But obviously he was not in any real stress. He could walk, he could talk, so they have chosen apparently to treat him with a very standard and routine drug regimen, which he may be on for a long period of time. Thirdly, they are obviously doing some other tests to find out if there are underlying causes for this heart rhythm problem. He did have an ultrasound exam, or what is often known as an echocardiogram, to look for any structural problems with the heart valves, for example, which can sometimes cause this problem. So I suspect the president's going to be in the hospital a little bit longer than they're indicating, and with a little more serious look for other possible causes than they might have been describing. But it does seem to be routine. He does seem to be in good condition. There should not be any cause for alarm.
Tim, every time we hear something about the heart, one is concerned about this heart attack, and Marlon would not rule out that he had not had a heart attack. Is that a possibility?
It seems very unlikely in terms of the way they described his case so far. It is sometimes possible that this kind of a heart rhythm problem, or for that matter, any heart rhythm problem of a serious nature, can lead to a heart attack. Or conversely, sometimes heart rhythm problems themselves will lead to a heart attack because the heart is not pumping blood adequately to its own heart muscle. There's no evidence from what they've been describing that he had a heart attack, because that would be a far more serious condition. He would obviously then be in an intensive care unit and be treated in a much more intensive fashion than apparently is the case.
Okay, thank you very much, Tim Johnson. I'd like to go back to Ann Compton at the White House. And it was my understanding that Marlon said there was no indication that there had been a heart attack, but that they were awaiting more test results. Was that your understanding?
Marlon, of course, is not a doctor and has come to report to us exactly what the doctors have told him. Two interesting points, at least to a layman like me, that the president will be on this digoxin for some days, weeks, or months to come, and two, that the doctors told him that jogging could be resumed within a fairly short period. There are a lot of indications that the president feels that he's going to come through this very quickly and very cleanly. As you'll remember, Carol, it was not just a few days ago when President Bush was at Bethesda Naval Hospital. He went in for his annual physical, which is fairly complete. We saw him come out and give the thumbs up sign. After that, when his White House physicians and the team there told him that he was passed all the tests with flying colors. I think perhaps the best sign of his condition at the very moment, he is having a steak dinner with Mrs. Bush in the presidential suite at Bethesda Naval Hospital. He watched this coverage of the news conference and even phoned in an answer from his hospital bed, saying that he had been jogging for about 30 minutes when he began to feel poorly.
That diet didn't sound like the right kind of diet to be having after steak.
There was no broccoli on the menu. By the way, Carol, you'll also notice from the chronology that Marlon Fitzwater gave that when the president did feel poorly, he turned to his Secret Service agent and said, let's go see the doctor. It was another hour and a half before they actually took the helicopter to the hospital. It was not with a great deal of haste that they rushed him out of there. He took a briefcase and actually conducted some business not only with Governor Sununu, the chief of staff, who is now at the hospital, but we're told conducted some business over the phone with Vice President Quayle when the Vice President called approximately 3 hours after the incident took place.
There were some questions about stress and anxiety. You've been covering the president. Has he had a particularly stressful week?
I don't know that the week has been so stressful as it has been the accumulation of 5 or 6 months of intense interest in the Persian Gulf War, the incredible anxiety over the Kurds, those who in the mountains of Iraq have been suffering. So there are a number of issues that have been formed, but he's struck up a fairly active travel schedule. Just today, the president went out and back to Ann Arbor, Michigan, one of a series of commencement addresses that the president has scheduled, and Marlon Fitzwater said there will be no change in any of the schedule. Those who watched him today, some seem to see that He had his usual vigor, and even when shouted down by a few protesters. The president was showing and said to Fitzwater that he felt no early signs of any kind of distress before the actual incident at 4:20 this afternoon while he was jogging.
Okay, Ann Compton, thank you very much. We'd like to go now to Steve Shepard, who is standing by at Bethesda Naval Hospital. Steve, what's going on there?
Well, Carol, it's actually quite quiet outside Bethesda Naval Hospital, except for the presence of television microwave trucks and members of the press who have gathered here to find out what we can about the president's condition. There's nothing very extraordinary going on here at all. Of course, security is heightened, as it always is when the president or the vice president are here for checkups. There are some Secret Service agents about. The president's helicopters, Marine One, was here earlier, but it has departed. So except for people like you and me, not much happening, and I think a lot of that is because people are relieved by the news from Marlin Fitzwater that the president is basically in pretty good shape.
Okay, Steve Shepard, thank you very much. To recap, President Bush is reported in safe and stable condition at Bethesda Naval Hospital tonight after suffering a heart rhythm disorder while jogging at Camp David this afternoon. Presidential spokesman Marlin Fitzwater says there is no indication at this time that Mr. Bush had a heart attack. The president will remain in the hospital overnight and will undergo further tests, but tests done so far show no heart abnormalities other than the irregular heartbeat. We will continue to keep you up to date on the president's condition throughout the evening with special reports as events warrant. And Jack Smith will have a complete wrap-up later on the Weekend Report. I'm Carol Simpson in Washington.
This has been a special report from ABC News. We now rejoin the Young Writers in its entirety. News break. Now from Washington, Carol Simpson.
Good evening. President Bush appears to be in good health and jovial spirits at Bethesda Naval Hospital, where he will remain under observation at least overnight. The president was taken by helicopter to the hospital this afternoon after he experienced a heart rhythm disorder while jogging at Camp David. He suffered an atrial fibrillation, a rapid, uncontrollable contraction of the upper heart chambers. It's a fairly common disorder that's not usually considered serious. The White House says there is no indication at this time that Mr. Bush had a heart attack. Doctors say Mr. Bush may be able to resume his normal activities within a few days. A complete wrap-up later on the Weekend Report.
Right now at Payless, buy one pair of any shoes.